Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books out loud while stoned. In this video, we're going to start a new Little Blue Book, and it is Little Blue Book number 1060, titled The Futility of Belief in God, written by Joseph McCabe, copyright 1926. This is one of the few that has a copyright date. And this one has, 7 chapters. And chapter 1 is The Silence of God. Chapter 2, Who Made the World? Chapter 3, Does Evolution Exclude God? Chapter 4, The Voice of Conscience. Chapter 5, The Religious Instinct. Chapter 6, A Chapter of Disproofs. And Chapter 7, Conclusion. So, without further ado, here we go. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Silence of God. A week or two ago, I stood on the brink of a dark, strange pool in central Yucatan. It lay deep in a large round pit in the midst of the forest, some 200 yards from the temples and sacred buildings which explorers had stripped of their mantle of bush and their mounds of earth. This was once a great Maya city. Now fat lizards sunned themselves in the rock ledges of the sheer sides of the pool. Tender foliage overhung the edge and was mirrored in the quiet water. A paved road led to the pool from the temples, and where it reached the edge of the pool, it ended in a raised parapet of stone. And I half closed my eyes and peopled the deserted woods with men and women who trod that road 1,000 years ago. A sacred procession comes along it, and with the austere priest are flower-decked maidens in festive dress. But in spite of flowers and fine robes, in spite of throbbing music and thousands of spectators, a look of terror quivers piously in the maidens' eyes. They are going to die. The god wants victims. The priests say so. In a few moments, these fairest things that life produces, young girls in the fresh bloom of womanhood, will be hurled from the parapet into, turning the page, into the pool 50 feet below, and they and their mothers must stifle their agony in a pretense of blessedness. Well, you say, that was in the heart of the Yucatan and 1,000 years ago. 1,000 miles away is the ghost of the city of another ancient American people, and guides will show you the stone on which priests stretch their victims to pluck out the heart and offer it to the sun god. Still, ancient America, you say. But away over the earth, in the islands of the Pacific, in Central Africa, the gods still clamored for the blood of men only a few decades ago. In ancient Rome, in Carthage, in Britain, in Syria, remember the story of Abraham and Isaac? Those ghastly sacrifices had been demanded. During countless ages of human history, men and maidens have been slain in the name of gods. Where was God? I do not ask you why he tolerated these crimes in his name for thousands of years, because the answer will be that you don't know. But you cannot blot all these horrors out of the memory of man by light assurances that the infinite mind cannot hope to comprehend the infinite. Oh, the finite mind. Sorry. I'm going to say my brain was that don't make sense. The finite mind cannot hope to comprehend the infinite. It is a truism, but the facts remain. From near the dawn of religion, which was many tens of thousands of years ago, horrible things have been done, and grotesque things believed in the name of God. Let me pause for a moment. Sorry, I had to pause it to turn off my notifications on my phone. All right, here we go. We'll pick back up. I am merely asking you for the moment to admit to yourself that you hold that God, your God, looked down complacently from his state of blessedness during long ages upon all grisly blunders and tortures of the children of men, yet might have ended the whole ghastly folly in one generation. We know not why he takes time, you say, but the hour comes. When? At Cholula, I see a Christian church perched on the top of a pyramid, which once bore one of these bloody Mexican temples. To the Catholics of the district, it is a symbol of the at-last triumph of revelation and mercy over human error and brutality. They do not reflect that they believe that God made those blundering and brutal humans of long ago, that he could have made them wiser in a year as easily as in 100,000 years. Moreover, to the Protestant, this pyramid church merely means that one ghastly error in the name of God has been substituted for another. An improvement, certainly. Men ought to grow wiser in the course of 2,000 generations. Hearts are not physically plucked out of living bodies in the Roman Church. No, they are sacrificed in a different way. Nearby, in a nunnery, is a nunnery, and priests lead pretty dressed maidens to the altar to make the vow of celibacy, which they understand little more than does the babe in arms, and which means living death to the heart. The Mayas and Aztecs went, but cruel things were still done for centuries, and are done today all over the world. Still are. In the name of God. And God was still silent. He was silent when women were drowned as witches and honest men were burned as heretics. He was silent when the savage and demoralizing doctrine of eternal torment was in his name imposed upon the whole earth 4,000 years after the founding of civilization. He is still silent when, as happened in Tennessee recently, the ill-educated preacher tells the agonized mother that the soul of her dead and unbaptized babe burns and will burn forever in the most appalling fires the human imagination ever pictured. I am not at present arguing about the existence of God. I am merely asking you to face manfully two facts: the long silence of God, the long martyrdom of man. We will argue about them later. First, let us add two other facts. The belief in God today is strongest where man has least to thank God for, and it is weakest where man I'm butchering this. It is weakest where men have most knowledge and most mental training. It is universal only where life is poorest and where men have the least intelligence to perceive whether or not they are indebted to God. Here and there in the world, both in Europe and in Latin America, you see what life was like 100 or 300 years ago. The very day before I sit down to write this, I wonder about it in a little Cuban town not 30 miles from Havana. The drains run in open filthy streams in the center of the streets. Disease hovers about every child that plays innocently in the sunshine. Today, little Rosita is a flower of the earth, the light and joy of one of these poor hut homes. In a few days, perhaps, the claw of diphtheria will be on her tender throat, or the fiery poison of smallpox or typhus will run in her veins. But they are all such staunch believers in God here in Guanajuato that they would cross themselves if they knew my opinions. I have been amongst such people in Spain and Italy, in Greece, in Serbia and Bulgaria. I've got an itch. This was the common life of men 2 centuries ago, and as the conditions are improved by man, belief in God decays. It was skeptics from New York who purified Havana, 30 miles away, and Havana has now very many skeptics. El Anticlerical, a native skeptical paper, sells in its streets. No men now believe most deeply and most widely in God, just where life is most treacherous, where poverty stings worst, where hearts are still torn out and sacrificed. And these men and women know less and are less capable of thinking than men in the skeptical cities where disease has been checked, where the burden is lighter. Somehow, the richer life grows, the less we thank God. The larger its problems grow, the less we consult God. The more knowledge grows, the smaller becomes the figure of God in the sky. The more learning a man has, the more likely you are to find him a skeptic. Which of these statements would you dispute? It is surely a platitude that belief in God is least disturbed amongst the more backward nations of the earth, that is, the most disturbed in the cities of the more advanced nations, and most of all in the learned world. I show this in The World's Great Religions, Little Blue Book number 1030, and I complete the proof elsewhere. But it seems to me a truism. So it is with the practice of taking one's troubles and problems to God. He is not seriously invoked at Geneva, where the world's gravest problems are discussed. He is unknown in the foreign offices of the great powers. There is some form of invoking divine guidance at Washington and Westminster, but is it serious? Do our highest judges now pray before they give their gravest decisions? Do our leading physicians consult God or medical works? No. God has been expelled from council and Congress, school and law court, almost from the home. He is confined to the church. It is strange to see how lightly the modern world abandoned God. In The Revolt Against Religion, Little Blue Book number 1007, I show that in the great cities of Europe only a small minority ever go to a place of worship. It is unquestionably the same in America. The bishops of the Episcopal Church in America found in wartime just the same proportion of men who never attended church as was found in England, 9 out of 10. Now, we can take a census of churchgoers, as we have done in London and Paris, but there is no census of sincere opinions, and we do not know how many of these non-churchgoers still believe in God. I have quoted one of the gravest of the English bishops saying, "Belief in God is dead in England." That is certainly a large exaggeration, but we do find by daily contact with the crowd that millions of our cities now no longer believe in God, or are so indifferent about the matter that they can hardly say whether or not they believe. For the other fundamental religious belief, the faith in immortality, men, even after giving up the Christian creed, make some sort of struggle. We get spiritualism, theosophy, Christian Science, which will be examined in due course in this series. But few plead for God outside the Christian churches. The belief is slowly dying, and God is still silent. He might write in letters of fire across the firmament at night, and we should all return to our knees. He is silent. But he has written on the firmament, once for all, you may say. On every stone of the fabric of the universe, you claim there are the initials of the architect and builder. That is what we are going to study in this little blue book. All that I want in this chapter is to persuade you to study it patiently. One of the silliest calumnies that was ever invented is the statement that only coarse-minded men reject belief in God. There are, it is true, people who thrust the belief out of their minds willfully and live rebelliously. These are exceptions. They were formerly far more common than now. Only a fool would defy a God, would purchase 30 years of pleasure at the price of an eternity of agony. In any case, the modern skeptic is a very real skeptic. His revolt is intellectual and emotional, and it is his finer emotions that cause his rejection of the idea of God. Does that puzzle you? Recall the long silence of God of which I have spoken. Those bloody human blunders are only a small part of the story. Man did not create the germs of diphtheria and smallpox, even if, in his ignorance, he made nurseries for them. For countless millions of years, deadly parasites of thousands of species have sucked or poisoned the blood of all other living things. For all these millions of years, the carnivore has rent the flesh of his victim. Your intellect may say that this is a mystery. Your heart is disposed to say that there is no mystery. That blind nature, not conscious purpose, must have begotten these things. The heart is not on the side of God. But the mind may have reasons which the heart knoweth not. To change the famous phrase of Pascal, you may think that you are able to silence the rebellion of the heart by heaping up formidable proofs that there is a God. On a question of fact, the heart may yield to the head. But here is another difficulty. Amongst those who are most capable of thinking, there is no agreement whatever as to these proofs of the existence of God. It is another aspect of this terrible problem of the silence of God. From the days of Plato, from the time of Job, thoughtful men have racked their brains to find and formulate proof of the existence of God. To the mass of mankind, of course, it is, and always was, simple. A famous preacher quotes with warm approval the saying of an Arab of the desert, when some skeptic asked him how he knew that Allah existed. "How do I know that a camel has passed this way?" he asked, in reply, pointing to the footprints in the sand. Strange, isn't it, that it should be so plain to the Arab and to the farmer and to the preacher, and so profound and difficult a problem to the thinker. Strange that in proportion as the mental eye is trained by education, the footprints on the sand seem to become fainter. Plato, the great Greek thinker, gave the world 2,300 years ago what men regarded as the most brilliant proofs of the existence of God. Hardly any man sees any force in them today. Aristotle, an even greater thinker of the same age, gave other and quite different proofs. Hardly any man follows him today. St. Augustine tried next, and his arguments are just as antiquated. From those days to ours, men have been inventing new arguments. We will consider them, and there is no argument about any of them. No agreement about any of them. The majority of our best thinkers, our philosophers, do not believe in the existence of a personal God. Not one of them admits any force in any of the popular arguments for God. I ask you only to admit that the matter is not so simple as you thought. That the unbeliever is not exactly the fool described by the Hebrew psalmist. It is a mighty problem. You cannot even understand the reasons why most of the deeper religious thinkers of our time believe in God unless you first learn the most difficult of all sciences, philosophy. It would take you years to understand what is called the position of God in modern thought. And God is silent. Well, these little blue books are not written for philosophers. A simple account will be given in a later chapter of what the I think it's philosophers, turning the page. Yeah, what the philosophers are saying. But in the main, I want to examine the reasons why the reader, or his religious neighbor, believe in God. 1,000 million people still believe in God, and for much the same reasons, and scarcely a trained thinker in the world will admit that those reasons have any logical force. And God is silent. That's the end of chapter 1. So let's see, how big is chapter 2? Because maybe we'll just do one chapter. No, we'll do chapter 2. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2. Pardon me. First, we'll take a drink. Hydrate, Maddie. Chapter 2. Who made the world? It's a good question. I wonder who did do that. In my many travels, I never obtrude my opinions about religion. I write them, and I lecture about them, and those who will may read or hear. I do not trouble others. But, knowing my opinions, people talk to me about God, and would understand why I cannot admit his existence. So they tell me why they believe in him. And the argument most commonly takes the form of the question which I have made the title of this chapter. Who made the world if there is not a God? The reader may have had a different experience, though it could hardly be a broader and more varied experience. Men and women, youths and maidens, preachers and lawyers, and men of business have put their belief to me in that form, and quite triumphantly. It was as plain as the lesson of the camel's footprint, and knowing, or believing, that I am a person of average intelligence, they really wondered what I would reply. And the reply, which is not really a reply at all, because the question is foolish, is deadly. You ask, who made the world? We will consider later the argument that the world maker must be personal or intelligent. Let us settle the question at once. We do it by asking another question. Prithee, how do you know that the world was ever made? Do not tell me that it stands to reason. The highest representatives of reason today are our philosophers and scientists, and I do not think that there is a single one of them now living who believes that the world was made. They may be wrong, of course, but is it not more likely that there is something wrong with the basis of your simple proof? Let us analyze it. In asking your question, you assume that the world was made. There is no need to define exactly what we mean by the world and made. We mean the universe, or if there are many universes, as some astronomers think, all the universes. Funny how they hadn't yet discovered that there were many, many millions and billions of universes in the sky. By made, you mean created. You take it for granted that there was a time when the universe did not exist, and that at the word of God it sprang into existence. And that is just where you go astray. There is no proof whatever that the world had a beginning. You will probably acknowledge at once that you had no definite reason for assuming that the world had a beginning. Everybody assumes it. simply because he has been taught for ages that Genesis, in its first line, says so. We shall see later what that means and what it is worth. But you cannot quote the word of God until you have proved that there is a God. And apart from Genesis, there is no ground for saying that the world ever had a beginning. So, there is no meaning in asking who made it. Do you mean, you will say, that the world is eternal? No, I mean that it may be, for all I know, or anybody knows. It is for the person who says that it was made, that it had a beginning, to prove his assertion. Until some sort of proof is given that the world was made, it is useless, surely, to ask me to speculate as to who made it. Here it is. It may always have been here. I think it was. In point of fact, practically all thinkers, scientists, and philosophers now regard the world as eternal. Philosophers, and many others, do so because the idea of creation out of nothing is incomprehensible to them, and, after all, there is only the word of some unknown Hebrew writer of 2,500 years ago in favor of this idea of creation. A little blue book in this series will show why we cannot take any serious notion of these unknown Jewish writers of long ago. Scientists regard the world as eternal, partly for the same reason, partly on account of what modern astronomy tells us. I am writing this at sunset on the deck of a great liner in the Gulf of Mexico. Soon the stars will shine out of the tropical dark purple sky as they never shine on land. A sharp eye can detect their difference in color: red, yellow, white, and blue. They are the different temperatures from dull red to steely blue, from about 3,000 to about 30,000 Celsius. The most wonderful instrument we have, the spectroscope, confirms this. And different temperatures mean different ages. The life of a star is its temperature. It begins, as all metal does, at a dull red, passes through yellow and white to a brilliant, passes through yellow and white, got an itch, to be a brilliant whitish blue, then sinks through white and yellow to red. We can tell which of the red stars are increasing in temperature, are beginning their career, and which are in their last phase. Another wonderful instrument invented in America a few years ago tells us this. It measures them. At first, the stars are of an immense size. I shall presently be gazing at one of the southern stars, Antares, the blood-red heart of the scorpion, which we know to be 400 million miles in diameter. Our sun is less than 1 million. Antares is beginning to contract. Our sun is far advanced in contraction. It is slowly dying. In short, the stars differ in age as much as do the human beings in a busy city street. The only difference is that the baby stars are giants, and the dying stars are dwarfs, and that the life of a star runs to billions of years. So myriads of stars will shine ages after our sun is dead. Myriads shone before our sun was born. And we see, all over the universe, the cloudy, filmy material for making new stars, when all our 2 billion stars have sunk into darkness. The universe is just like a nation, apparently. Generation succeeds generation. We have no reason to suspect a beginning or an end. Rather, the reverse. Naturally, we do not say dogmatically that the universe had no beginning. For my part, at least, I should never say positively that the world is eternal. I do not know enough, after 50 years of study, to be as dogmatic as preachers are. But we do know one thing. The stars differ from each other in age by billions of years. The old ones, that for an eternity there was a void, and then, for some unknown reason, God spoke and the universe leaped into being, is certainly wrong. The stars would be of the same age if that were true. Those who reconcile science and religion now often say that God merely created the material of the universe and allowed it and gave it the power to evolve. This does not help in the least. We have no reason whatever to suppose that the matter of the universe ever had a beginning, so we have no reason to entertain the idea of it being created. You may choose to believe it, but you are believing and asserting something for which there is not a shred of proof. Here and there, in old-fashioned religious literature, you find a curious attempt to prove that the world really had a beginning. The proof runs something like this. If the world is eternal, then the number of days or units of time which have already elapsed must be infinite. But the number is being added to every day, so it cannot be infinite. Therefore, time is finite. They say much the same about space. If the universe is infinite, the number of miles out in any direction from our Earth must be infinite. But there are just as many miles in the opposite direction, so I do not know whether the reader expects a patent analysis of this sort of verbiage. Writers who say these things are merely playing with ideas. There are no days or miles in nature. There is no such thing as an infinite. As an infinite series which is bounded at one end. The whole argument is preposterous. And much the same must be said about a set of arguments for a maker of the universe, which, like the preceding, are chiefly used in Roman Catholic literature. There are causes and effects in the universe. One argument runs, and therefore there must be a first cause. There are movements in the universe, so there must be a prime mover. Something ultimate which moves all and is not itself moved. There are things in the universe which exist by chance or contingency, but at the base of all there must be something that exists necessarily. Roman Catholics are most amusingly proud of these curious arguments. They imagine that they are part of the great treasure of learning of the Catholic Middle Ages, and that Protestants have forfeited their wonderful demonstrations by severing themselves from Rome. The truth is that all such arguments were completely discredited more than 100 years ago. They are mere words and phrases strung together. They do but gather dust in our libraries, as the great American thinker Professor William James said of them. Take the supposed argument for the first cause. The idea of cause and effect is not taken very seriously in modern science and philosophy, but we will accept it as roughly expressing what we see in nature. Heat causes evaporation, electricity in the clouds causes thunder, and so on. And of course, you must come ultimately to a fundamental cause or causes. There is no clear reason for saying that ultimately there is just one first cause. There is a reason for giving it, or them, capital letters. In point of fact, either, which Professor Dayton Miller has recently proved to be a reality, is probably the ultimate or fundamental reality of the universe, the prime mover and all the rest of it, until you prove that either had a beginning, that there was a time when it did not exist. The mind cannot pass beyond it. But how, we are asked, could a material reality like either be the first cause of spiritual things like mind, emotion, and idealism? A stream cannot rise above its source, we are told. Well, we cannot here discuss materialism and spiritualism. That is done elsewhere. We shall see that there is no proof that mind is spiritual. So there is no need to assume a spiritual reality, and no need to use capital letters for the first cause and prime mover. These dry as dust arguments are quite discredited in modern thought, and we will not waste further time on them. I notice them rather as illustrations of my point, that most people believe in God on grounds which are disdainfully regarded by other believers in God as mere fallacies. They argue together only in saying that the existence of God is certain and the atheist is a fool. After that, each flatly denies that the proofs of the other are any value whatever. But there is another type of very zealous believer who thinks that his proof is in the strictest accord with science, is, in fact, based on science. Men put this to me with the greatest assurance and profess a pathetic surprise at the skepticism amongst men of science. There are laws of nature, they say. Every page of a scientific work talks about them. Very good. Then there must be a lawgiver. Great minds stamped these laws upon the material universe and so set it evolving. It is a good example of the extreme weakness of all the popular arguments for the existence of God, of the way in which religious literature always lags a generation or two behind science and philosophy, and so believers are honestly unable to understand the agnosticism of modern thinkers. The Catholic, with his first cause and prime mover and necessary being, lingers in the atmosphere of the Middle Ages. The Protestant, with his laws of nature, is merely clinging to fallacies of the early part of the 19th century. Laws of nature, as we use the phrase in science, have not the least resemblance to human laws, and have no relation whatever to a legislature or a mind. We say, for instance, that there is a law of gravitation, but we do not mean that there is a code of behavior drawn up in advance which things must obey. We mean simply that things do behave consistently in certain ways. The law, as we call it, is simply a description of their behavior. How very shallow some eloquent preacher or apologetic writer says, Let me ask you again to reflect that it is strange that these men should be so profound, while our great men of science, or who are all their lives studying the laws of nature, very rarely believe in this supreme legislator. You must surely sometimes suspect that there is something wrong with this cocksuredness of the preacher and the religious writer. There is, and it is very simple. He never, quite naturally, knows enough about science to understand fully these matters about which he speaks. A stone, let us say, always falls to the ground unless it is prevented. Why should it, unless there is a law imposed upon it? Nature acts uniformly or consistently, but if nature is blind and unconscious, ought we not to expect things to act erratically, not uniformly? Not in the least. It is a very poor fallacy. Consistent behavior is just what we ought to expect from blind mechanical things. A ball will roll in a straight line unless something interferes with it. It is will or mind that we might expect to act otherwise. It would be a proof of mind and nature if things at times did not act uniformly. It is precisely the contrary when we find them acting uniformly. No, along these lines the human mind will never reach God. Many learned theologians, in fact, now give up the idea of creation, or first causes, and prime movers and legislators. They look to the order, the beauty, the design in nature for proof of the existence of a great intelligence. Let us see what there is in this. And I'm pretty sure that is the end of chapter 2. And yep, that is the end of chapter 2. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of Little Blue Book number 1060, titled The Futility of Belief in God, written by Joseph McCabe. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 2.